I'm Mel Hauser. I use she, they pronouns. I'm the executive director of All Brains Belong. Welcome to Brain Club. Let me share screen, get us oriented to our conversation. So, tonight we will be talking about neurodivergent culture. Before we begin, just to let you know, closed captioning is enabled. You just have to toggle it on if you'd like to use it. Depending on your version of Zoom, you might see the live transcript closed captioning icon. If not, look for the more ... and choose show subtitles or hide subtitles if you want to turn them off. If you're new, what is Brain Club? Brain Club is our education program for purposes of demonstrating All Brains Belong's approach to neuro-inclusive culture. For purposes of promoting broader community awareness of the topics and themes that are of importance to the neurodivergent community, and promoting new ways of thinking and being. So with the idea that then you go off into your life and model what you've seen here. While we hope that this is a place where you feel safe and supported right from your very first Brain Club, this is not a support group. It's also not a place for medical or mental health advice or a place to make personal requests or address personalized needs. It's also not a neurodivergent affinity space. This is a place for all people to be welcome, to come, and to learn. So we invite you to listen, learn, observe about neuro-inclusive space and think about how what you're learning connects to your life. There is no one right way to participate at Brain Club. You can have your video on or off, and even if it's on, we don't expect anything of you. We certainly do not need you to sit still or look at the camera or any of those other neuronormative constructs. Feel free to walk or move or fidget or stim or eat or take breaks or anything else that needs doing. During the discussion portion of tonight's event, you are welcome to use mouth words or the chat, any way that you communicate. You also have no pressure to do so. Observation is a valid form of participation. And in addition to affirming all aspects of identity, one of the ways that we keep the space feeling safe to all nervous systems is to prioritize the group's collective needs over that of any one individual. That's my visual support to make sure I have the chat. Oh, that's funny, Joe. I don't know why that is either. Thank you. All right, so if it is your first time at Brain Club, it's okay to not understand what's coming. Keep coming back. And many people share that it takes several passes before you that you get the rhythm down. Lizzie's going to put in the chat a link to the frequently asked questions that cover a lot of logistical information that sometimes people are wondering about when you first start arriving. All right, before we begin, a couple of announcements. Our next webinar is coming up in a month. Tuesday, April 8th is our 4th annual Shifting the Autism Narrative, the Impact of Stigma on Health. It's a webinar that we do every April to cover the history of the autism narrative, which is really a sordid tale that not a lot of people know, and how the role of the healthcare system in driving stigma and what we can do instead. One more announcement I would like to make. I am really proud to announce that our community advisory board and professional advisory board has recently launched a new project called the All Brains Belong Community Health and Access Fund. In response to the looming cuts to Medicaid, our advisory boards took the initiative to proactively start collecting over-the-counter medicines, supplements, grocery cards, and funds for adaptive equipment and prescription medicines for patients in the All Brains Belong community who are likely to lose their insurance very soon. So if you have capacity to support the ABB Community Health and Access Fund, we would greatly appreciate it. All right, so we are beginning our new theme of the month, the journey of identity formation, and we'll be taking a look at this from various angles. So we'll start this conversation with a look at culture. And to do that, we are going to take a look at an old brain club. It would be a 21-minute video where you will see a conversation between me and some community members and Brain Club attendees of 2022. So we're flashing back to November 1st, 2022. And I think what for those of you who've been part of this journey all along, be wondering about, you know, have our views shifted at all over the past 2.5 years? Are there the way the language that we use to describe things, has it shifted at all? And are there some, in listening to myself in this clip, some things that I say that I think reflects an earlier stage of evolution of my own journey. I'll look forward to discussing what you notice. So with that, David, take it away.
So, if that term is new to you, access needs are anything that are required to meaningfully and fully participate in one's environment or community. Everyone has access needs. It's just that for many people in our community, in particularly the at least 1 in 5 people whose brains work in ways that differ from the ways in which society has deemed normative, um, we are less likely to have our access needs met by the defaults of society. And so that's where this conversation begins. But there are all kinds of access needs. And this can be related to physical access needs, related to the environment, for example, and related to sensory processing, may relate to mobility, it may be emotional, might be communication related access needs, maybe related to the format of information, the speed, or the time of processing, might be sensory related aspects of processing. For example, auditory processing is hard for me most of the time, but it is nearly impossible in a really cluttered environment when there's a lot of visual or auditory chaos. It's very hard for me to take in information through my ears. Interpersonal or social related access needs. For example, some people have the types of brains that really benefit from clear communication, where someone says what they mean and means what they say. Not all brains communicate in that way. That might be an access need for a relationship. Maybe it relates to technology. Maybe it relates to other, medical. There's all kinds of access needs. So I just wanted to present this framework. Um, Anything that anyone needs for full and meaningful participation. So a lot of times people say, "Well, I don't even know. I don't know what my access needs are." Like one of my patients, one of my favorite things that anyone's ever said in my life is this: "I don't know what my needs are. I just know they're not being met." Yup. So these are just some screenshots from an Instagram post that All Brains Belong did maybe a month ago or so, around, how do you even figure out what your access needs are? So step one might be a reflection of what's not working, because this probably relates to an unmet access need. Lizzie, would you be able to pop the Instagram post into the chat for this one? Cool. All right. So, like,
Hey,
what drains
David,
my
can you
battery?
pause?
When am
David,
I
can you
exhausted
pause?
or really stressed out? When do I shut
Sorry.
down? When?
Sorry. We're going to shift gears a little bit. Hang on one second. Thanks for your patience, everybody. That you'll either thing. I'm not going.
I'll say, Luna, there's no right way to participate, remember? This is a place where, like, there's no right way. And she says, oh, now I'll go. So, anyway, the attitudinal norm is an access need for many people. That's why we include it. And of course, because we're all going to have different brains, we're going to have different access needs. And sort of acknowledging that and acknowledging that sometimes those access needs are going to conflict. And that's inevitable. And so having a plan for course correction is okay. So we'll proceed through that. So that was a slide from last week. So anyway, the last thing that I'll mention is that a word on language. So tonight you'll hear me and maybe other participants using identity first language as it relates to neurodivergence. I am autistic, and for me, that is part of my identity. That is not the case for all autistic people. But it is the case for me and many of our participants. And so sometimes when identity first language is new, it can sometimes be like, ooh, that's new. So that's the idea, is the idea that for many people, language reflects paradigm, the way that we're seeing the world. And when we do not need to necessarily separate things from our identity, that comes out in language. And I think you'll hear that play out tonight. As I said, all forms of participation is okay, and all forms of communication are okay. You know, in addition to, as I described before, chat box, unmuting and shouting it out. You know, using emoticons, reactions, mixing, matching, whatever you're comfortable with. And safety. Safety comes first. And so affirming all aspects of identity. And as I said before, respecting and protecting access needs. And so another slide from last week, we talked about how a safe space requires that a shared goal of not only meeting our own access needs, but not violating others' access needs. And so the last part of ground rules that I'll cover, because sometimes this term is unfamiliar, is that of a content warning. A content warning is an important part of neuro-inclusive safe space. You're welcome to share your truth, whatever you feel safe talking about. But just keep in mind, if there's something you're talking about that you personally experienced as distressing or traumatic, please let others know about it first by announcing the name of the topic. Call that a content warning, and try to keep those topics with content warnings as brief as possible, so that participants who you know, they can listen with informed consent, or they can turn their sound off or leave the room for a minute or two, and we'll type in the chat box with content warning over. We may need to redirect the topic of conversation to protect others' access needs. Okay, we're gonna start. All right, so neurodiversity and culture. A few months ago, we had a whole monthly theme talking about the double empathy problem. Some of you remember that, may remember that. I don't know what you remember, where it's not that there is one correct type of social skills, communication skills, but it's about miscommunication being the result of a mismatch of worldview or a mismatch of communication styles. And in English July, we took on the theme all month of bridging the double empathy problem in relationships, education, healthcare, employment, just about seeking to understand other perspectives. And I think this is the natural progression of that. Because when we think about culture, we're really talking about the customs of a group of people. They're the norms of social interaction, behavior, communication, attitudes. And whenever we are encountering someone who belongs to a culture different from ours, sometimes those norms may be different from ours. And it's not a big deal. We celebrate that. We celebrate that diversity, and we seek to understand it. And that works out. And for lots of people, neurodivergence, that is the way that you know, that one's brain is wired to think, learn, and or communicate, is actually a culture. And often it's not talked of in that way. Sometimes, lots of times, in fact, the message is given either explicitly or implicitly that there is one correct way to socialize, one correct way to behave, communicate, when really it may be an issue of culture. So I shared last week, I'm going to keep using this slide because I love it so much. I used this slide from a training I gave to some therapists a few weeks ago about neurocultural competence. And I said, hey, Luna, she's 5. Luna, I'm doing another neurocultural competency training. What should I tell the people? And this is what she said. She said, Mama, tell them there's no right way to be a person. As she sits there in her mermaid sparkle dress, eating chicken off a stick. Yes, Luna, there's no right way to be a person. So I thought about any number of ways that we could have taken tonight's brain club. And I thought about like getting really specific about some of the cultural trends in many, not all, but many neurodivergent communities. But then I remembered the long game. At ABB, we often talk about the long game and often throw a hashtag behind it and post it everywhere. We really want to think about that of inclusion, right? Like creating spaces for people with all type of brains to belong. And so, I really want to be moving away from an us versus them paradigm, right? And really just promoting safety and connection for all people. Because I think Luna says it best. There's no right way to do most things. And so since connection is the pathway to health, and we want everyone to be as healthy as possible, remembering that there's like any time there's like a default behavior, a default way of communicating, a default way of like being in the world, a default way of writing an email, a default way of like attending a Zoom meeting, like that's not going to make all people with all types of brains feel safe and connected, and therefore it's not healthy. So I think that with that introduction, I'm going to play a video. Actually, what I'll say first is that some of you have been, we started Brain Club back in January, and when the format has evolved like a lot over time, but I'd say lately we're getting into, because I think when something loses novelty, we change it up. So lately, the ABB staff, when we find ourselves having an interesting conversation at a meeting, we're like, oh, this should be a brain club, and we record it. And like, anyway, so we're going to do another short video clip. So this is a conversation Sarah and I had. So Sarah Wilkins, our community programs coordinator. Hi, Sarah. I'm gonna play our casual conversation, and this video is I was gonna say it's exactly 9.5 minutes. I know because I just made the video 5 seconds ago. So anyway, so while this is going, feel free to keep the chat box going, and then we'll have plenty of time for conversation. But we can start the conversation now in the chat box. All right, here we go. I never remember the motor plan of getting out of this box in time. Here we go. So you were saying something about not feeling alone.
Yeah, I feel like that is something that comes up a lot with the ABB community, as feeling like people have found their tribe and feeling less alone in their journey, whether it's as a parent or as an individual. connecting people with one another and making people feel less alone.
Yeah, like I think that connection is the path to health. No one tells you that though. And so like when you're in it and you're alone, you don't know that the reason you feel so terrible, one of the reasons you feel so terrible. Actually, you know what? If I have to unhide self view, show self view. Okay, because then it could be like a conversation.
Sure.
So like when you're in it, when you feel terrible and you don't know why you feel terrible, and if you're going to make a list of all the things about why you feel terrible, being alone might not even be like on that list because no one tells you that connection is part of health. It's in fact like the important path to health.
Right. And with the neural pathways in our brain dating back to many, many years ago, there's a huge part of our brain that still functions in that need to belong. And, if you didn't have that back in tribal times, then, you could not survive, and so I think, having community is it's a deep wired part of our brain to need to belong.
Yes.
And when we don't have that, there's a part of us that feels like it's, just super isolating and I think people just need that for safety. They need to feel that sense of belonging and community. And I think that's what people find when they come to All Brains Belong.
Today, I attended a virtual talk by my professional idol, Dr. Virginia Spielman, who's the executive director of the STAR Institute for Sensory Processing. Dr. Spielman had the most anytime I hear her speak, I'm just like, everything you say is gold. But some of the things she said were things like, self needs other in order to become. Wow. And she talked about like self-actualization. Part of that is communal actualization. It's like part of the development of personhood.
Yeah.
And she talked about skills for the job of living. And the skills for the job of living are doing, being, becoming, and belonging. Wow.
Because this is how people lived for so many years in hunter-gatherer societies, right? Like I've heard Dr. Gabor Mate say that, the ideal environment for a child to grow up in is a hunter-gatherer society. That's what the research shows.
Totally.
Because being around the community, having aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents and neighbors and friends and, having that community around around a family provides, less stress, on all the responsibility falling on the parents, for example, if it's parents with children. And it's just, it's just the way that we're wired to be, is to live in community and cooperate with each other, to each have different roles that we play. And, that idea of interdependence, it really is a primal need, really, to be interdependent. And this myth that we live in, a world where we're supposed to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and live in an individualistic way is really toxic. And it's
totally toxic.
Just a world that, ABB is providing a space that is much more in tune with sort of where people started, with communities and bartering and sharing and, taking care of one another.
Totally. And I also think that in societies where groups were collective, like all doing the thing together, like that's that's also missing. So you don't like go to a group of autistic people. You like because you're not doing anything. So you're not becoming, you're not collecting, you're just like sitting there, anyway. So the idea of that you would meet someone through your shared interests and like do the thing. The thing might be talking about a thing that you care about, but you're still doing the thing, doing it together with other people who are, interested in that thing. It's not just like, put a bunch of random people together and form friendships. Like that's not how it works.
Right.
And so like a lot of times, there'll be like social skills groups or like something like that, which are often, giving the implicit message that like you don't have any social skills because there's one right way to have social skills and you don't have it. So like there's that, but it's also like not how people make friends.
Yeah.
So it's so I think back to when Anna House presented at Brain Club and was talking about like, okay, so like where do you meet friends? Like how do you even get started? And it's like you have to first actually figure out what you love.
Yeah.
So like then you can find people who love what you love, but if you don't even know what you love because you're so dysregulated, like it all just and then I connect that to like the Hannah Bloom Brain Club 2 weeks ago, where it's like, okay, well, we were thinking about like how as parents, do we signal safety within like the culture of our households? And like what came out of that, I was like, as an adult, I am so rarely regulated. And Hannah was like, I think she was surprised to hear me say that. I was like, no, I am so rarely regulated.
Yeah.
So you like have to be regulated in order to know what you love, in order to then do the thing you love and be connected with people who love what you love. And you're not regulated if you're not connected. It's like this vicious cycle.
It is.
So at least to come and connect as the path to health and regulation, like that's like another starting place of like, all right, well, let's talk about the journey. Let's talk about regulation. Let's talk about these things that, they're relevant to my life. At least start there. And then you can differentiate based on your interests once you become regulated enough to even engage in your interests.
Yeah. I think like you talked about, people have to feel safe and they have to feel that sense of community to even access that part. Because I think a lot of people, they're just, they're burnt out by life. And so they maybe aren't in tune with what brings them joy. And so being in an environment that talks about access needs, not just for some people, but for everybody, that everybody has access needs. And so normalizing that and allowing people to discuss, openly, like what their access needs are. I mean, that's something that a lot of people have talked about with ABB, that they never had, they didn't have language for that before.
Right.
They didn't know what that, they just didn't, and they didn't consider that they maybe had access needs or that other people might as well. And just coming to ABB and having the language for what their experience has been up until that point, which, for some people it's, in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and you've not had language to go with some of the feelings you've experienced throughout your life, and so having language to put to that is the first step, and feeling safe and having community. And then I think you can get to like, well, what are we passionate about? What can we connect on with other people?
Any thoughts? Is this resonating with anyone?
I was just about to type in the chat, and then I'm so happy that I don't have to type in the chat and can talk, because I hate typing. But I'm
so glad that you shared your access needs.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm so happy to talk, but I'm not going to show my face because I'm in my PJs and my dog is being crazy. Anyways, I wanted to say like yes to that idea that access, or that vocabulary And language is so key to being able to create community, because it's so key to be able to express ourselves and to be able to articulate the emotions that we feel on top of the experience we're lived. So I just wanted to say yes to that. ABB's taught me so much language and vocabulary, and just ways to think about the problems. So yes, I just want to say yes to that. Yes to the vocabulary. Yes to the language. Thank you for that.
That's amazing. Right. You know, like I didn't have a language for this for like almost all of my life. Right. So just and I think I was having this conversation not about neurodiversity and access, but about a different topic. But like the analogy I think will be apt is I was telling my husband, I said, you know, I think that little kids, when a narrative is not provided for someone's experience, they tell themselves, we told ourselves a narrative to fill in the gaps. And almost always the narrative that a little kid comes up with is, I'm broken, I'm defective, it's my fault. And I think that, like, you know, as an adult, like unlearning the narrative of like there is a correct way to do the things and it's not me, like that is real. And you know, I really want all young kids, you know, my 5-year-old, all my little kid patients, to grow up like actually thinking that there's not a default way to be a human, and it's really like it's all okay.
I mean, I think what we're bumping into is just feeling like this world is made of systems, and the systems are not designed to accept our child or even interested in truly understanding like what his access needs are. And it's demoralizing, I guess. I don't know what the right word is, like frustrating, you know, like wanting the culture to be there and feeling like, yes, we are. You know, I guess like maybe we just, if we think of ourselves more as like pioneers, because nobody's done this before, and hopefully in 100 years we'll look back and be like, yeah, those folks that were like on the forefront of increasing access and just changing the way that neurodiversity is talked about and thought about, like that's, you know, they were on the right track. So I don't know, it just sometimes I think it's just hard to even crack into this.
It's a good place to pause. What's standing out to me is, and I that last comment from Stacy, I think started this angle of thinking of like shifting from anything about the individual and looking at systems and developing this understanding of broken systems that are shaped by, you know, all kinds of forces, and recognizing that when, you know, when I was listening to the beginning of the conversation, you know, just the idea of like, well, we're wired for survival to be with other people. It's like, well, sometimes connection feels like a luxury when you don't have enough food, or you don't have safe housing, or you don't have, you know, your basic needs met. So I think that my thinking around this has shifted over the years. I wonder what's standing out to others. Sierra.
I, you know, as the probably third or fourth time I've listened to this conversation, one thing that really struck me this time, which I think Weaver pointed out in chat about kind of the importance of identity, but to me, it really pointed out the difference between identity and labels. And that labels are often just so much more. Labels can be great, but they are also um, not. They don't have the person at the center necessarily, and are a lot of times more isolating. Where identity, even if it's like the same word you're using, it is such a bigger part of like creating community. It's got kind of the person at the center. Yeah, that's what stood out to me.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? So there you have a label which may or may not be claimed by the individual as part of their identity. Like there's that distinction. When a label or a word or like whatever you want to say, when that is claimed as identity and when that provides a pathway for self-understanding or connecting with other people based on that lens, that can be really powerful, but that's not always how it goes. Depends on what culture, it depends on what's going on in your culture. Like I think in our culture, just the experience of, let's say someone learns that they are autistic or ADHD, um, it's like, oh, congratulations. Like it's that kind of that kind of something where it's like that's not how it is in most experiences. So it's the like there's not a fast track necessarily or that any track between like those the identity and labels are not always connected.
I feel like that's why the validity of like self-diagnosis and self-identifying as neurodivergent is so important to a lot of people in neurodiverse culture, because it's not having somebody else put that on you and being able to self-identify and say this is something that I'm gonna like try to ingrain in the culture. It's not always, but
Anyone else, either in the chat or out loud, anything that's standing out to you about this conversation?
I think I always want to make a distinction between looking at culture and language and how we create culture and continue creating culture and the difference to society. And especially when we often are talking about, in the last 5 years, it's gotten a little less popular just in the last two, but it's been really popular to talk about, especially ADHD and autism culture. And um, as a sort of, find your tribe type of situation, which is complicated. It's a complicated statement to say and make. Um, and also to really compare those with, hunter-gatherer type things as if to legitimize the need to legitimize like our validity as human people on the planet, that we were made in order to have, like so we could catch the deer, or the tiger didn't get us, or like there's we have to have a reason to exist. And that makes it complicated to talk about society and also culture without really defining those terms together, which obviously we don't have time to do tonight. Um, but I want to like highlight that what does culture mean to like each person in this room? What does society mean to each person in this room? What does the rules of engagement in our own identities mean to each person in this room? And then think about how would it be to have those conversations together. Um, and I think that's kind of like that's what I just keep picking out. So, Oluwini, thank you.
Letting that sink in, Rye. I think that's it's really important. I think like this was not the case at the time in which that interview was was recorded, but like the shared language, shared terms that you don't commonly hear in other groups, communicating around access needs, communicating around motor plans, like these things that we talk a lot about here in everyday life that somehow makes the day-to-day experience easier by being able to have that shared language. I think like that's an important part of culture too. But so much layers of complexity, and in particular, as identity is so much more than neurodivergence in terms of the intersectional experiences and aspects of identity. Thanks, Rye. I didn't see the order of things. I see Amy's hand up first. I think Amy and then Barb.
I think what Rye was speaking into just kind of reminds me of some things I'm thinking about, which in terms of like self-determination, I'm thinking about like the medical model of disability, or some people are starting to call it the normalization model of disability, and how we've all sort of found ourselves in this box of needing like either being late diagnosed in our whole life feeling like there's something wrong with us or not knowing, or having been identified early in life and feeling this feeling of like we're broken, we need to be fixed and changed. And I think it's shifting to the social model of disability, but even then it's like, okay, we'll change the environment, so we have to change the person. And I think that folks who are exploring, you know, neurodiverse models of disability where we're not actually asking anyone to change, and we're actually asking culture to do the work to meet us, and that all forms of communication are communication. And so I just think that having this conversation tonight and thinking about identity and thinking about culture we're creating together, and including everyone in that. And I just wanted to say I really appreciate what you were bringing up, Rye.
Beautiful reflection. Barb, I saw your hand up. I don't know if you still wanted to share. Love to hear from you if you do. It's okay if you don't. Okay. Amy, your comment is making me just to be able to preview for everyone the book that we're gonna do our book chat on at the end of the month, A Little Less Broken, which is it's basically a memoir of somebody who's late diagnosed autistic, and tells the story of like all these snapshots that are so relatable in like really vivid language, that I think is going to be a really powerful discussion. Sarah.
I loved Amy's comment, and I just wanted to just add a tiny spin to it, which is I think we're asking the culture to do the work to meet us, because as a child coming into a culture, there's no way that you can't possibly already be doing the work to meet them. So it's what we're asking for is reciprocity. We're already invested in trying. We've either given up on trying because it was too hard, but we've already been invested in trying to meet the culture where it's at, and experiencing the frustration of not being able to do that. So we're asking for a bit of reciprocity for the culture to come back and actually try to understand where we're coming from.
So well said, as always. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this conversation and being part of our community. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. Let me see what next week is. Oh, next week we will be joined by Annie Crow, who is an attorney, a human rights attorney, and a neurodivergent advocate, joining us from Australia. And she's coming live to have a conversation with me around the way that identity is influenced by work experiences. We look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.